it's unfortunate we are looking at a continental approach to the issue of debt and development, but the realities, the country realities are not the same. For instance, in Kenya, for instance, and in Nigeria and other countries, you have what you call the Freedom of Information Act, which gives you or which compels public authorities to reveal information to you. It is not the same in Cameroon where we practice. We don't have the Freedom of Information Act in Cameroon. So it is difficult for me practicing in Cameroon to have access to information that you practicing in Kenya or someone in Nigeria or in some other country that has that Freedom of Information Act. So we are saying that there could be some advocacy at that level, that if a government or authorities want to contract a debt, a loan or something, there should be a clause that says every part of every transaction should be made public so that journalists can have access to the information and can be able to track it. As since we don't have that Freedom of Information Act, we will only base our reports on what the authorities want us to know and not what the public needs to know. So we'll basically be giving what you are saying, giving just the information without digging deep into knowing what is happening. So we are saying that there should be advocacy at the level of policymakers so that either there is a Freedom of Information Act which compels them to give information, or there should be a clause in every contract or every loan that they are taking, which says that each time such a loan is taken, there should be the transaction should be made clear and available to reporters and journalists so that they can disseminate to the population.
Our friend from Cameroon was talking about the inability to access media in his country. I think then we should relate that with the environments under which journalists operate in different countries in Africa. And then here we are talking about media houses and possibly what they stand for. So I can give one or two examples where we have a journalist who is so much inspired to do a very nice story. He spends time and money to do that story, but when he gets to a newsroom, forget about the owner. He gets an editor who does not understand that. So automatically that story dies because this man or this woman is above you and does not understand what we are talking about. So that's a challenge that media people face, not only in Kenya, but I want to believe across Africa. Secondly and lastly, it's about media owners. You realize you've talked about Safaricom, and I include that with many other multinationals, include universities. These are major advertisers for media houses. And I've written stories about them because they also commit a lot of crimes. But what do? You go out there, do a very nice story on Kenyatta University, but when you come back to your newsroom, you are told you are sorry. We cannot run this story because actually we have like 5 pages that Kenyatta University is advertising tomorrow. I was in London last year, and there was a story on on illegal financial flows that was done in collaboration with an organization in the UK. But the person who was involved said he tried to talk to all major media houses in Kenya, and they said, we are sorry, we cannot run that. Until they had to run it with, I think, some organization here called the Elephant. So those are the challenges that media people have, and as we address, as we call them out to say, can you do something different, then we should also have enough time to tackle this, because if I'm a photographer, I'm working for a media house in Kenya and I'm being paid 250 shillings for my picture, and I live in Nairobi surely, then I will find other ways of getting cash other than focusing on doing the right thing. Lastly, to our hosts, there is a major disconnect between people who want to work with the media. And that, I will point out one case whereby you will find all these NGOs, civil societies, or other people who are interested in coverage will only send an invite today and tell you that tomorrow, let us meet at Hilton tomorrow at 10, we have this. So maybe even the media house has no time. They will send you someone who does not understand what you want to be covered. Can we have a longer term relationship with media and possibly even promote investigative journalism that offer solutions other than just reporting everything that happened today, then tomorrow we are on other things.
And I want to speak directly to a journalist, the journalist you have described, in two settings. The first setting is where you're a good journalist and you write this good story and it is killed or mutilated by your editor. What do? You have a number of options. I mean, if he does that twice or 3 times, then you know that he will still do it a 4th time. So what you need to do is find an alternative place to publish your story. After all, it's your story. And if someone, someone told me, go where you are celebrated, not where you are tolerated. If you realize that you will never quite move in the next 2 or 3 years, find a place where you can move. Now, I'll tell you something that my professor told me when I was defending my thesis. He said, you're the one who's done the research. You're going to defend your research. Now, there are people who will see it differently, and they will probably even poke holes into what you're going to say. But the research is yours. You are the authority. So stand by your research. As a journalist, you've invested so much energy and so much research in a story. If somebody wants to mutilate it, find another way of disseminating it, because they've not killed your skill. Now, if you end up getting sacked in a particular media house, do what I tell every young person. If nobody will hire you, hire yourself. All those who are hiring you, or you are knocking at their doors to hire you, were like you. They started. And with anyone who has an account on Facebook or Twitter or YouTube is a media owner. That's what Jalango discovered. And Safaricom, instead of running to where he was chased from, is now chasing after him. I think he's made enough money, he even wants to run for office. And you can be the next Jalango. Just, what are you good at? Develop that, put up a YouTube channel, put out your content, tell us to subscribe, sell your content to advertisers, and move on and hire people. You don't have to die there miserable. Now, supposing you're in a country then, this is the second scenario. You're in a country where freedom of expression is so limited. The executive controls not just the media houses, but also what you say and when you say it. And you really want to get your journalism out. Do what we used to do when President Moi had taken controls of the Kenyan media. We turned to BBC and VOA and so on. So the thing I really want to emphasize is, pick this from me. You're more important than the world will ever make you to be. So pick up your dignity, pick up your skills, and if they are locked up in one corner, take it to the next corner. In fact, if you are so good, but you're not getting opportunities in Zimbabwe or Uganda or Burundi or Cameroon, come to Kenya. and do what you know best to do. Find opportunities in other parts of the country, in other parts of Africa. And the world is waiting for you.
What happens when your reporting comes up against the interests of your owners or of the political elite, the ruling elite? My answer would be, push as far as you can, but also choose the hill that you want to die on, right? And this is from experience, right? That sometimes when you try and push a story, you have to really think about your own interests as a reporter. Do I want to keep my job, or do I want to keep reporting these things? The legend of these kinds of interactions would have you say, no, I'm going to do my job, and I'm going to report this, publish and be damned and the like. But we know that there are much more practical concerns that people have on a daily basis. So choose the hill that you want to die on. If you think that you're going to, you can survive without a job and perhaps publish elsewhere, then by all means go ahead and do it. But also weigh the risks that you might be facing should you choose that route. Will these organizations sue? What kind of pressure can be brought to bear on you should you persist with your reporting? And weigh those risks even before you start reporting, so that you're not frustrated in the end that you've done so much work. I think the other thing to consider is that there's a much richer ecosystem for the publishing of content like this outside of legacy media, right? And it would have just as much, if not more, traction than it would if you allowed it to be reported and perhaps massaged or watered down in a media house that you're working for. There's lots of people who'd be interested in publishing this content on your behalf, and it's a strategy that was used even in the 80s, where the 80s and the 90s, where if in Kenya there's a specific story that journalists here have dug up but can't report, then they would share it or leak it to other reporters from outside the country and then report about that other reporting. So there's ways and means to be able to get through this.
Yes, John, as I still have the mic, let me just ask you, I've been following your interventions, your reports on different platforms as investigative journalists. So I would like you to tell us about your own experience in Kenya. How do you cope with authorities in this context of Africa? Because I know it's not very, very easy like in Burundi to report on issues like finances and development issues, corruption, and the powers which are captured by some high personalities. So it's very sensitive. Sometimes journalists, many people may think about reporting under pseudonym or anonymous names. So how can you cope in Kenya? Do you have a certain degree of democracy, of telling the story in regard or in comparison with the rest of Africa? Because I know, like in our context, it's not very easy to touch on such stories.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot to the gentleman from Burundi. So I'll answer both questions in one go. In terms of secret relationships, this is a problem across Africa, and you're right, where our access to information laws, even if they do exist, sometimes are just not followed, and government agencies, parastatals, ministries sometimes are the culprits in not doing this, and so it's very difficult to be able to establish what the relationships are. However, there's another way of going about these things. It's in looking at the bits of information that are public. So company A might have its company records with the registry. Who are the owners of that company? And if there is, sometimes there are personal relationships there between the owners of the companies that engage in public-private partnerships and the agencies that are then the procuring agencies, right? So that's one way of being able to try and prise open the conversation about what really are the secret relationships between one party and another. I'm not sure about whether Burundi has an access to information law, but I do understand the context. I've been to Bujumbura and I know that it's difficult to be able to report as openly as it would be here in Nairobi, perhaps even in Kampala. But Africa is like one big WhatsApp group. So one person will forward a message about restrictive laws, and someone else will try and act on those things. So, for instance, with Kenya, our cyber crimes bill has various clauses in that are just incredibly punitive. And going into the era where we're going to be publishing a lot online, then that's going to be a problem for us in the future. Whereas there is a more open environment to discuss things on the news, less restrictive than it would be in Bujumbura or in Kampala or even in Dar es Salaam until perhaps a little recently. There are certain elements or aspects of our laws that are very restrictive, very punitive. Even in the awards on defamation, are incredibly high and incredibly punitive. And what's happening now is that that's being focused more and more on the journalists.
I have really enjoyed the level of in these first two sessions. And just to speak to my brothers from other African countries who are as frustrated as we may be about the lack of transparency with some of the deals that parastatals and governments get into. And John, good to see you. It's Wahiga here. What I can say is that eventually nothing will remain hidden forever. Okay? And so for me, I think for us as journalists, I guess it's just cultivating that patience to wait. One day a data leak will happen somewhere and we will get access to those documents. For now, the best we can do is make official attempts and sometimes unofficial attempts to try and access some of that data. But let me tell you, in the world that we live in, with the interconnectivity and the globalization that we have, one day all those contracts will come to light. And for us, with the pieces that we've put together already, once we get access to the final contracts, it will be very easy to put together a detailed story that will make sense for our audience as to why things are the way they are. So I understand your frustrations. Even as I sit here, I ask myself, here in Kenya, there are certain contracts we have waited to get access to for a long time, and we actually have the law on our side in regards to that. And so don't give up. Maybe that's the message that I have. Don't give up. Keep pushing. Keep trying. Eventually, all that is done in back offices will come to light, and it is our role to make sure that we really run with them when that does happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to build on that point around globalization, and John did allude to it in his response. And I think there is an opportunity here for media, whether you're based locally, internationally, continentally. The exposés that have taken place in the last half decade, let's say, for example, on tax issues and illicit financial flows, are just but a reminder that that globalization can actually work for investigative journalism, and also the creativity that can exist within the media fraternity. Let's look at it this way. The companies that operate or have interests in a country like Kenya, and building on what Adrian's presentation was about, are not necessarily all headquartered in Kenya. They're headquartered in different parts of the world, in different locations. And in those different headquarters, there are sometimes better legislations when it comes to issues of access to information. Companies in these different jurisdictions are a lot more forthcoming in having to present information when you make these types of requests, and also governments. that are supposed to, respond within a specific amount of time to freedom of information or access to information requests. So I think there's also that opportunity when we talk about follow the money or the money trail. Not all roads lead necessarily to the central bank or to the treasury here in Nairobi. Some of them may lead you to London, to New York, where the rules are slightly different and the laws are a lot more forthcoming and a lot more lenient to engaging with journalists and with the general public. So that creativity as well in understanding how the ecosystem of business, finance, and economics works might also be an opportunity for journalists to consider, rather than if you come up against a brick wall in one jurisdiction. And I think that point about globalization, that's where also as media and as journalists, these opportunities are coming about. I think many of you would have heard, I think earlier this week, the tax leak in the US, for example. There are people who are also frustrated, the bureaucrats that sit in government offices who are not necessarily part of that ecosystem, but see how certain individuals are benefiting at the expense of the majority. They too are allies in this fight. And I think as journalists, there is an opportunity to tap into that frustration, particularly in a time of a pandemic where bureaucrats are having to do things they would not otherwise be engaged in, yet they can see the impact that is taking place right before their eyes or towards citizens. So things like that are also avenues and creative ways that as media, as civil society, we need to sort of bring together and strengthen that ecosystem that continues then to have the opportunity to hold the broader ecosystem to account.